It was 1978, the height of disco's glittering reign. The Bee Gees weren't just famous, they were the heartbeat of the era, staying alive. Night Fever. How Deep Is Your Love?
How deep is your love? Is your love? How deep is your love?
These weren't just songs, they were cultural events, and at the center of it all was Robin Gibb. With that unmistakable voice, a sharp mix of fragility and power, able to turn any lyric into something unforgettable. But just when the world thought it knew exactly who Robin was and what he stood for, he surprised everyone. While his brothers were busy with platinum albums and movie soundtracks, Robin stepped into a recording booth with some of the most unusual collaborators imaginable: a towering yellow bird, a sugar-addicted blue monster, a lovable goofball named Grover, and one grumpy green creature who lived in a trash can. Yes, Robin Gibb, the man who helped define the sound of disco, recorded a track called Trash for Oscar the Grouch. This wasn't a parody. It wasn't a sketch for TV. It was a fully produced disco song with real musicians, a danceable groove, and Robin giving it the same focus he'd give a Bee Gees hit. Why? Why would one of the most famous voices in the world spend his time singing about rusty tin cans and banana peels? Was it a clever inside joke? A favor to a friend? Or just Robin being Robin? Unpredictable, eccentric, and delightfully unafraid to be silly? The answer is real. The recording is real, and the story behind it is one of the most charming and bizarre footnotes in Bee Gees history. And it all began with a single phone call. If you love finding the untold, surprising, and downright delightful stories behind music's biggest legends, make sure you're subscribed to RetroWaves, because the moments you've never heard about are the ones you'll never forget. To understand why this collaboration was so strange and so perfect, you have to understand the climate of 1978. The Bee Gees were everywhere. In the 2 years since Saturday Night Fever hit theaters, they had dominated the airwaves with hit after hit. The soundtrack became one of the best-selling albums of all time, cementing them as the faces and voices of disco. But the higher you climb, the more carefully you have to protect your image. The Bee Gees' polished look, glamorous lifestyle, and slick production style were part of what kept them on top. Yet at the same time, trouble was brewing. Critics accused disco of being shallow and over-commercialized. Rock purists mocked it, and though the disco sucks backlash hadn't yet reached its breaking point, the rumblings were there. From a business standpoint, Robin's best move would have been to double down on adult audiences, keep the Bee Gees brand sophisticated, and avoid anything that might make them look like a novelty act. But Robin didn't think like that. He was famously unpredictable. His friends often described him as equal parts poet and prankster, deeply serious about music, yet just as willing to laugh at himself. So when the producers of Sesame Street approached him with an idea for a parody album called Sesame Street Fever, he didn't scoff. He didn't ask how it would look in the press. He said yes. The concept was simple but brilliant, a disco album performed by the Muppets, with storylines woven through the tracks. It would feature Big Bird reluctantly trying to dance, Cookie Monster turning C is for Cookie into a funky club jam, and Oscar the Grouch belting a love letter to garbage. But to make the joke work, they needed a real disco star, not someone winking at the audience, but someone who could give it authenticity. And Robin, with his warm falsetto and open-mindedness, was their first choice. It was the kind of left-field decision that didn't surprise those who knew him. Robin could pivot from an emotional ballad about loss to a whimsical song for children without blinking. And when he walked into that recording studio, he wasn't just humoring anyone. He came to make a record. The producers later admitted they weren't sure how Robin would react. Asking a Bee Gee to sing about trash was a big swing. But Robin didn't just agree, he seemed genuinely delighted. He understood that the key to comedy, even in music, is to play it straight. The song would be funny because it was good, not because it was sloppy. From the start, Robin treated the project with the same professionalism as any Bee Gees recording. He wanted to know who Oscar was, what he liked, how he felt about his garbage. He didn't want to just sing words, he wanted to inhabit the character's world. This wasn't a cameo, this was a collaboration. When Robin arrived at the studio, it was like stepping into another universe. Gone were the mood-lit recording rooms and stylish session players of a Bee Gees date. Instead, the air was filled with laughter, Muppet rehearsals, and the faint smell of hot stage lights. Costume racks lined the walls, not for human performers but for puppets. Some stars might have rolled their eyes at the chaos. Robin embraced it. He joked with the crew, asked the puppeteers how they brought Oscar to life, and even tested a few lines in Oscar's growl before settling into his own smooth delivery. The energy was infectious, and Robin was all in. Trash was Oscar's anthem, a celebration of the beauty in what everyone else throws away. The music, pure disco, thumping bass line, lush strings, and a groove that could slide into any dance floor playlist. The lyrics, an unapologetic love letter to garbage. Robin's performance made it work. His voice gave the song an unexpected elegance, turning phrases about moldy food and broken furniture into something almost romantic. It was ridiculous, it was brilliant, and it could only have worked because Robin sang it as if he meant every word. When Sesame Street Fever finally landed in August 1978, there was no glitzy premiere or press junket, no limo lines outside record stores. It simply appeared on the shelves of department stores, toy shops, and a handful of music retailers who had been convinced to stock it alongside the latest pop releases. It could have slipped quietly into the background, but it didn't. Parents picked it up for their children, expecting a handful of silly tracks to keep them occupied on rainy afternoons. But when they dropped the needle on side A and Robin's unmistakable voice filled the room, something happened. For a moment, the music didn't feel like children's entertainment. It felt like the radio hits they were dancing to on Friday nights. Only this time, Big Bird was on backing vocals. The joke was in the concept, not the execution, and because Robin approached it with such sincerity, the joke didn't wear thin after a single listen. Soon stories started to circulate, of parents borrowing the record for themselves after the kids went to bed, of teenagers begrudgingly admitting it wasn't bad, of Bee Gees fans buying it just to see if it was real. It never reached the Billboard Top 40. That was never the target. The real success was how it spread organically, passed between friends as a curiosity, a guilty pleasure, or for some, a badge of musical open-mindedness. Even critics, those same writers who had been sharpening their knives against disco, found themselves softening when they wrote about it. One review in a regional paper summed it up perfectly. Robin Gibb treats Oscar the Grouch like a duet partner instead of a prop, and that's why it works. For Robin, it was a rare reprieve. No one was pressuring him for a radio-friendly single. No one was calculating the return on investment. It was simply a session he'd enjoyed, and a finished product he could be proud of. Why him? Why not all three brothers? The verified facts are straightforward. Robin was approached first, and he agreed immediately. That was enough for the producers, and enough to make the concept work. But if you zoom out to 1978's Bee Gees schedule, the decision makes even more sense. Barry was deep into producing other artists, including the massive Guilty project for Barbra Streisand. Maurice was balancing recording, arranging, and countless behind-the-scenes tasks that kept the Bee Gees machine running. Robin's calendar was full too, but he was also the brother most inclined to follow an unexpected idea wherever it led. His solo career, even before Sesame Street Fever, was proof of that. He had made haunting ballads about war, concept albums that defied pop convention, and orchestral projects with little concern for chart placement. While there is no confirmed statement from Barry or Maurice about their absence, Bee Gees historians often suggest, clearly a speculation, that they might have been wary of how the parody concept could be spun by the press. With disco's cultural standing already under attack, they may have wanted to protect the Bee Gees brand from being misunderstood. Robin, however, saw no downside. He didn't see a parody of disco, he saw an extension of it. A chance to laugh with the genre, not at it. In hindsight, his decision feels like a perfect reflection of his personality, a mix of courage, curiosity, and a quiet defiance of other people's expectations. Over 4 decades later, Trash is still one of those rare songs that can stop a conversation cold when someone hears it for the first time. Imagine being a new Bee Gees fan, working your way through the catalog, discovering Odessa, Main Course, Children of the World, and then stumbling on a disco groove about garbage, sung with complete sincerity. At first you laugh, then you listen closer. And suddenly you realize this isn't a throwaway. The bass is tight, the strings shimmer, the percussion is crisp. Robin's phrasing is spot on. It's as polished as anything in the Bee Gees' prime-era discography. Collectors treat Sesame Street Fever like a prized artifact, not because it's rare, millions were pressed, but because it's such a perfectly preserved collision of two cultural giants. The cover art alone, Grover in a white suit, Big Bird mid-strut, Oscar peeking from his trash can, is enough to draw smiles from anyone who lived through the era. In some countries, particularly Japan and parts of Europe, demand for clean vinyl copies remains strong. Music shops in Tokyo's Shibuya district have been known to keep a copy in the featured bin purely because it always sparks conversation. For the generation that first heard it as children, the memory is layered. They didn't know Robin Gibb as a Bee Gee. To them, he was the man who sang with the Muppets. Only years later, often in adulthood, did they realize they'd grown up with one of the most distinctive voices in pop history, serenading Oscar the Grouch. That's the quiet magic of trash. It bypasses the usual routes of fame and instead sneaks into people's lives in ways they don't even realize until much later. It's the final day of mixing. The control room is warm from the equipment, the faint smell of coffee and reel-to-reel tape in the air. Robin leans forward in his chair, elbows on knees, as the opening bass line of Trash rolls through the speakers. The strings swell. The groove locks in. Oscar's gravelly voice cuts in, grousing about garbage, and Robin answers with a line sung like a confession of love. No one in the room is laughing now, not because it isn't funny, but because they're too caught up in how good it sounds. The engineers glance at each other, relieved. The producer exhales, and Robin, he closes his eyes, nodding along, a half smile tugging at his lips. They'd done it. They'd taken a premise that could have been cheap or silly and turned it into something that, in its own bizarre way, was as valid as any other disco record of the time. In a music industry that often valued image over substance, Robin had proven that Sincerity could elevate even the most unlikely material. And maybe, just maybe, he'd proven something else, that disco was never as narrow as its critics claimed. It could be glamorous and gritty, ironic and earnest, serious and silly, sometimes all in the same song. So why did Robin Gibb, at the height of his fame, record a disco love song to garbage? The confirmed reason is refreshingly simple: because it sounded fun, because it made him smile, and because for Robin there was no such thing as lesser music if it was made with care. He didn't approach it as a career move, he approached it as a musician and a person willing to step outside the expected and follow his curiosity. And that's why the song endures, not because it topped charts or broke records, but because it carries the rare, unfiltered joy of an artist doing something purely because he wants to. And that's the true, verified story of the Bee Gee who gave Oscar the Grouch his disco groove. Do you think this was Robin Gibb's strangest detour, or his most charming? Let us know in the comments. And for more untold, heartwarming, and sometimes downright bizarre moments in music history, subscribe to RetroWaves, because the next one we tell might just change how you see a legend forever.